there would be outrage, and quite rightfully so as well. I think that would be a disgusting video game mechanic. And yet, we have all of these studies which tell us that there's no link between video game violence and real-world violence. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that it's just morally repugnant. It doesn't really matter if it's going to have any effect on the real world, so to speak. It is just something we shouldn't morally allow for people to take enjoyment in that kind of simulated behavior. I go into this in detail in that video, and I discuss the uniqueness of sexual ethics as opposed to other kinds of ethics, and there's all kinds of avenues to go down. But I think what this shows at the very least is that the ethical question is not just about whether this video game behavior will cause people to do bad things in real life. There has to be something else going on. Like, if we decide that it's just morally wrong to allow people to enjoy simulating that kind of behavior, then why are we just totally fine with people enjoying simulating blowing up a hospital or stealing an ambulance and running over a bunch of innocent civilians with it? And yet, despite these considerations, I just can't really see much of a problem with Grand Theft Auto. I'm going to play it when it comes out for sure. But this kind of consideration might help us to start thinking about what this commenter is saying, that you're morally obligated to choose the good option in video games. Not necessarily because it's going to have any real-world effect, so to speak, but just because it's a better indication of character, and it's just wrong to enjoy doing the wrong thing, even in a simulated context. But the reason this is spicy is because it just seems like ridiculous, right? If you're playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and I think you can like make choices throughout the game and it affects your like honor rating or whatever, it seems like, yeah, it's just fun to, you know, act badly and get the bad honor rating and see all of the different cutscenes and how the dialogue changes and stuff. It's just kind of more fun sometimes in a video game to do the bad thing and see what happens. But, you know, it's sometimes more fun to do the bad thing in real life as well. But we don't do that because it's wrong. And I think the main argument in favor of this kind of idea would be a virtue ethics perspective. What would the virtuous person do? Now, you might be thinking, well, look, I'm a virtuous person and I sometimes do the bad thing in video games. It's just a bit of fun. But like, I imagine someone who like hasn't played video games, like a grandparent or something, if I gave them this game, Grand Theft Auto, and watched like my grandmother sit and try to play it and said, oh, you know, if you wanted to, you can pick up a gun and shoot someone, she'd probably be like horrified by the idea. And I could say to her, you know, it's just a game, you know, it's all made up. And she would say, no, it's just, that's still just disgusting. I would never do that. People my age have just grown up in a world where we're used to this kind of thing as entertainment. But maybe if we managed to step out of that for a moment and look on it with fresh eyes, we'd realize that actually there is something a bit grotesque about all of this. So just like imagine the most virtuous person you can think of. Maybe it's your own grandparents. Maybe you think of someone like Jesus of Nazareth, right? Jesus is archetypally this like perfectly virtuous person, right? At least according to Christians. And so think, if you're a Christian in particular, would Jesus play Grand Theft Auto 5? You know, would Jesus, when confronted with an ethical dilemma in Red Dead Redemption 2, choose the honorable action or the dishonorable action? It kind of just seems to me like he would choose the honorable one. Like, can you really imagine Jesus Christ picking up a PS5 controller and going, yeah, let's run over a bunch of civilians? I kind of just can't see it. And if that is the case, then maybe it's an indication that there is something wrong about choosing the immoral behavior in a video game. Now, to be clear, it might be wrong, but like trivially wrong. It doesn't need to be really bad and really important. Like, if I go and buy a coffee at the store and the person behind the counter says, how's your day going? And I'm having a bad day, but I lie to them because I can't be bothered to get into it. So I say, yeah, I'm doing great. Like, yeah, I've told a lie and that's probably not ideal. And there will be people out there who say that was probably the wrong thing to do. But like, who cares? If it's wrong, it's like the least important wrongness that you can possibly imagine. And video games might be a bit like that. It might be that all other things being equal, yeah, you actually should choose the good option. But if you don't, it's like, really not that important. Like, yeah, I can't shake the idea that if I watch someone play GTA 5 and pick a bad option, I just don't think that person is immoral. But at the same time, I do just think that if you took the most virtuous person you could possibly imagine and gave them Grand Theft Auto, especially if you did it in like an isolated environment where they weren't brought up with it being normalized, they'd maybe never played a video game before and didn't really understand it, and you showed them this simulated world, I just can't shake the feeling that they would react with horror to it and like refuse to do all of the bad stuff. And if we can learn anything from virtue ethics, it's that what the virtuous person does in any given situation is the right thing to do. So if the most virtuous person we could possibly imagine would choose the good option, then maybe that's just the right thing to do. Maybe that is our moral obligation. And yeah, you can say that, well, doing a bad thing in a video game is just a bit of fun. But so are a lot of immoral things, you know, like joyriding. It's just a bit of fun, you know, trespassing and running around on someone else's property. You know, it's just like a bit of fun. It's a thrill. But it's wrong. Stop doing it. I don't know. I'm still going to choose to do the bad thing in video games sometimes. I don't think that that makes you an evil person, but I do think it's an interesting thought, and perhaps one that hasn't had enough like ethical attention paid to it. I would love to see some papers written. I'm sure some papers have been written, and some people can point me to them on like the relationship between video game ethical dilemmas and virtue ethics. But just one more thing, there is actually a paper by Brian Tomasic. He's got a website called reducing-suffering.org, and he writes a lot about animal suffering. And he has this essay called Do Video Game Characters Matter Morally? And he makes a case in this essay that we shouldn't harm NPCs, non-playable characters. Those are sort of people who just walk around on the streets in Grand Theft Auto or something. Not because of the effect on our virtuous behavior, not because it might cause us to go and harm someone in real life, but because those NPCs actually have moral value. Like seriously, it's worth pointing out that he thinks the moral value they have is like really, really small, like it's almost minute, but that it is there, and that there's like this continuum of sort of preferences, from the preferences of a simple computer-generated NPC all the way up to like the preferences of an animal, and then the preferences of the human animal, and that these are all preferences. It's just that the computerized NPC preferences are extremely more rudimentary and therefore extremely less morally serious. But they do still have some kind of moral worth. In the summary of his essay, he writes, "The difference between non-playable characters in video games and animals in real life is a matter of degree rather than kind. NPCs and animals are both fundamentally agents that emerge from a complicated collection of simple physical operations, and the main distinction between NPCs and animals is one of cognitive and affective complexity. Thus, if we care a lot about animals, we may care a tiny bit about game NPCs, at least the more elaborate versions." And look, there might be something to this, right? Like, if you're a materialist and you think that all of our brains, and animal brains as well, are just complex arrangements of atoms that happen to produce these things called preferences, well, computer simulations kind of do the same thing. This is the fear that people have when they think we're living in a computer simulation. It's the idea that a computer really could simulate consciousness, and it would do this by creating these artificial agents that are really just zeros and ones, but develop these rudimentary and then slightly less rudimentary eventually preferences, which give rise to consciousness in this simulation. And Brian Tomasic is just seriously engaging with the idea that there already are preferences, rudimentary preferences, but preferences nonetheless, in video game NPCs. At least I think it's something like that. I haven't actually read the whole essay. It might have nothing to do with preferences. He might cash it out in different terms, but he does think that NPCs have some kind of rudimentary moral worth. And I just thought that I would mention it because I just suddenly remembered that that exists. Oh, and no, by the way, I forgot to say I don't agree with Brian Tomasic. I just wanted to bring it up because I just remembered that this essay exists. But I don't think video game NPCs have ethical worth. It would be kind of horrifying if they did, actually. If you think about the number of NPCs just in one game, and then the number of games that are played by people all across the world, and how often these NPCs are just run over and beat up with baseball bats, and have explosives tied to them and thrown off buildings and stuff. It's a pretty horrifying thought, actually. But I will link this rather long essay in the description so that you can make up your mind for yourself. I mean, looking at the contents of this essay, it looks really fun. He talks about video games as the future. One of the headings is, what about enemy aggression? Like, yeah, maybe NPCs have moral worth, But what about when those NPCs attack your character? Isn't it a form of self-defense? It just looks really ridiculous, but kind of fun at the same time. Actually, on that point of enemy aggression, he says, the obvious oversight in this argument is that the player is the person who set up the bloody arrangement to begin with. I think he means bloody in the literal sense there, not the British sense. Suppose you build a coliseum and hire a rival to fight you to the death. During the battle, it seems like you have the right to kill your opponent because he's trying to kill you. But from a broader perspective, we can see that it was you who created the whole fight in the first place and thereby ensured that someone would die. So yeah, okay, fair enough. Maybe self-defense is not a good enough excuse for the senseless violence inflicted upon billions of NPCs every single day. We should all be doing something about it as a matter of moral urgency. I don't know, let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, I'll also link in the description my video on the ethics of Grand Theft Auto.